The Jail, Chapter 59. The jail, which was empty most of the time, sat behind the post office and was set over to one side so that it was clearly visible from the main road. I seem to remember it as a box-like red brick structure with bars in the front. It was more like a large cage with metal rods running all the way down the front from the ceiling to the floor, similar to the one that housed the two tigers in the Rangoon Zoo. This is where the Karen insurgent was confined for several days. His wife, furious at the injustice, said she was equally guilty and demanded that she be allowed to join her husband in confinement. She had been a teacher at Kingswood School, and we were all very impressed because we thought she was overwhelmed with love and loyalty toward her husband. We didn't know then that revolutionaries sought incarceration and wore it as an emblem of courage and saw it as an opportunity to draw attention to their cause. Because we didn't understand and were quite unaware of the reasons behind her decision, we were astonished to hear that shortly after their release, she and her husband had split up. I imagined that having been cooped up together in a small cell for too long had proved true the words in my autograph book which said, "Familiarity breeds contempt." The couple were members of the Karen National Union, the KNU, which had formed as an amalgamation of the various Karen national associations in 1947. Karen was a term loosely applied to a group of tribes who may have originated in China. Many Karen had been converted to Christianity by missionaries who arrived in Burma around 1830, and some sought initially to identify themselves as separate from their non-Christian brethren. However, under British rule, preferential treatment was given to those Karens who had converted to Christianity. Later, with the founding of the Karen National Association in 1881, an attempt was made to unite all Karens, irrespective of religious affiliation. Directly impacting our lives, however, were the incidents that occurred in 1948, shortly after Burma received its independence from Britain. There was considerable political turmoil, with the People's Volunteer Organization and the Communists agitating for a foothold in positions of power, and the new government of Burma floundered under the leadership of UNU, then the Prime Minister. The British had installed General Smith Dunn, a Karen, as Army Chief of Staff, but UNU replaced him with General Ne Win and sought to curb the unrest by deploying army units under him. The Karens, who had also been agitating for some time to form an independent Karen state, revolted when a group of irregular political militia in early 1949, under the command of General Ne Win, rampaged through several Karen communities. Resentment had been rife much earlier, and the insurgency was further inflamed by rumors of support for the Karen that would be forthcoming from the British if the Karen revolted. The rumors had been propagated by a Colonel Taluk, and also by a newspaper reporter, a Mr. Campbell. The rebellion was finally quelled, but not before the insurgency caused the road between Kalo and Taunji to be closed, blocking access to the insulin which my father so desperately needed. This same jail temporarily held Yasin Khan, the exiled Afghani minister, and later on a different murder charge, Hajra's mother, the wife of Munshiji. She had spent decades with her husband, a man many years her senior, and she had fallen into a pattern of serving him and producing his children. There had never been anything particularly attractive about her, but she was notorious in the gossip circles of Kalaur for her alleged trysts with other men. When Munshiji was murdered, she felt liberated and single, not realizing that many years had gone by and that she was no longer the young girl she had once been. Who knows what passions lie hidden in the breasts of those with the plainest of outward appearances? Her straight hair was long, and since she had quickly plucked out the stray white ones, was still black, and she wore it knotted into a bun behind her head in the manner of most Burmese women. She was of medium build, flat-chested with a tight small behind, devoid of curvature. Soon after her husband was laid to rest, it was rumored that a romance developed between her and Babu Lal, a young man who was the son of the local dhobi and the brother of Sona and Sukya, the two sisters who became our live-in housekeepers for a short time. According to the gossip, Babu Lal, who was several years younger than her, was supposed to have initially been quite smitten with her, but then shifted his amorous attentions towards another damsel, and Hadra's mother sensed with trepidation his gradual distancing of himself from her. His visits to her became less frequent, and she finally began to realize that the years had taken their toll. A small mirror hung on the wall, and standing before it, she scrutinized her face. Below the mirror was a narrow wooden ledge where she kept her cosmetics, and she surveyed her armory of makeup. It was limited to a small jar of thanaka, which she had made by rubbing the bark of a small log of the sandalwood tree, using a little water on a chaupie, and creating a creamy paste. She had carefully scooped it up with her fingers and stored it in an empty jar, which had, a long time ago, held Pond's cream. There was an old tube of bright red lipstick, worn down to a tiny stub, sitting deep in its yellowed plastic casing, which had a fine grime-embedded crack running down the side. A glass jar that at one time had held ngapi now stored coconut oil, which she used liberally and regularly to grease her long black hair. There were 2 sandalwood combs, one of which had its teeth set extremely close together to extricate head lice. Both combs had long ago lost the scent of the sandalwood of which they were made, and were lightly crusted with oily scalp scum. The fleeting flush of youth had been but a template waiting to record lines that would reveal her character. The brown skin, which had glowed in her youth, had, with the repeated use of the astringent thanaka, turned into fine crepe, dry and wrinkled. Her nose, though small, was pressed back close to her face, the nostrils slightly upturned at the tips. Her eyes, a deep brown and almond-shaped, looked tired. Her lips had lost their fullness and lacked contour, and were almost apologetically there to serve the purpose of eating and speaking. When she finally learned that her fears were not without substance, she was driven to that extreme where rationality and logic dissolved in a fit of jealousy and anger. Held in the grip of an emotional state that gave her no respite, she walked determinedly to the Chinese restaurant by the marketplace, knowing they would have what she wanted. Rats frequented that area behind the restaurant, which was often littered with garbage, and some were bold enough to occasionally sneak into the storeroom as well. The owner used whatever means he had at his disposal to rid himself of the menace, and had found a white powder the most effectual way to get rid of them. He happily sold her a small packet of the strychnine when she told him she had an infestation of rats around her house. She held the packet tightly in her fist, and her nostrils flared with each breath as she clenched her teeth and rapidly walked home. She sent Babulal a message pleading with him to come and see her, and he decided it couldn't do much harm, because she had loaned him money in the past and had never demanded that he return it to her. He might even be able to get some from her again and buy a pretty trinket for the young woman he was now pursuing. He was quite disinterested and rather sickened by her attempts at intimacy, and decided he would feign a severe headache which would arouse her sympathy and make it easy to get the money from her, and at the same time dissuade her from attempting to entice him into what for him was now a repulsive physical encounter. That night, when Babulal arrived at her house, he told her, as he had planned, that he had a severe headache, and as he had expected, she reacted with great sympathy. She told him to sit down while she massaged the back of his neck and pressed gently on his temples. He began to think that she was not so bad after all. She might still be worth keeping for a while longer, and the extra pains she had taken to look nice appealed to him and made him think that perhaps he could still keep her and have the other woman too. She suggested that he lie down while she made him a cup of tea and walked over to the adjoining room that served as a kitchen. He heard the tinkling of the teaspoon in the porcelain cup as she stirred the sugar and the white powder into the tea, making it extra sweet the way she knew he liked it. She walked back into the room and smiled kindly at him as she watched him drink from the cup till it was empty. He asked her to come sit beside him on the bed and began reaching for her hand, but then suddenly got up and started pacing the room restlessly, while his eyes darted about as if terrified of something. She sat quietly watching him as he began to groan, and then his neck and back began to arch uncontrollably. She panicked and fell at his feet, frightened and weeping, begging him to forgive her, that she loved him and didn't want him to die. As he doubled over, moaning in agony, she knelt on the floor, wanting to stop his suffering, but she was helpless as he struggled to breathe, then stiffened and lay still. According to Sukhya, Babulal's soul was unable to rest, and so his ghost walked down the street on dark nights past their house, groaning and moaning and calling on his sisters to avenge his death.